Breaking Up with Addiction is proudly supported by experts you can trust. Kindbridge Behavioral Health, safe, non-judgmental counseling just a tap away. Welcome to Breaking Up with Addiction. I'm Gwendolyn Boyd McGee, licensed professional clinical counselor, and our co-host Corinne will be joining us later. So in today's episode, we're exploring the stages of gambling addiction and recovery. And whether you're early in the journey or supporting someone who is, this episode will help you understand the emotional, behavioral, and psychological shifts that take place and how healing really happens. But before we dive into today's episode, I would like to know, listeners, were you able to complete your homework assignment? I certainly hope so. Having a strong accountability network can be extremely beneficial for recovery. I'd like to look at the descent, recognizing the pattern. And let me tell you something real. Addiction doesn't usually show up like a thunderstorm. It doesn't knock down your door screaming, "I'm here." It slides in quietly. It shows up in the small shifts. The things we tell ourselves are no big deal. So how does it begin? For many, the descent into gambling addiction starts with subtle behavioral shifts. You might begin hiding receipts or deleting a betting app or just saying things like, "I'll make it back next time," or "this is just my escape." Or maybe you start chasing losses, feeling the need to gamble not just for fun, but to recover what you've lost. And most people don't recognize this as a red flag. Why? Because this world normalizes gambling. From fantasy football leagues to scratch-off tickets at the gas station. It's everywhere. But when gambling becomes a secret, a place you go to numb, cope, or forget, that's no longer entertainment. That's escape. So I'd like to go even a little deeper. There's a moment, sometimes a slow one, when gambling stops being something you enjoy and becomes something you need, especially when you're dealing with things like stress, loneliness, boredom, grief. You start thinking, "I just need a little excitement. I've had a hard day. I deserve this." Or, "This is the one thing I can still control." And that's a trap. Because gambling, like all behavioral addictions, offers a false promise of relief. It hits the reward center in the brain, gives a dopamine spike, and tells you, "This will help," but that relief, it's temporary. And once it wears off, the guilt, shame, and financial stress roll in heavier than before. And so you go back. Not for fun, but to outrun the pain. That is how escape becomes a habit. So maybe you see yourself in this, but I want to make one thing very, very clear. This is not a failure. This is a pattern, and patterns can be unlearned. Addiction, especially gambling addiction, is about repetitive cycles. You feel discomfort, you seek relief, you experience consequences, you feel shame, and then you gamble again to escape the shame. Do you see the loop here? And to break that loop, you have to name it and you have to see it. This is where many people get stuck. Not because they're weak, but because they're in denial. They may say something like, "It's not that bad. I can stop anytime," or "It's just money. I can earn it back." But these justifications are a shield to protect you from the reality that something deeper is happening beneath the behavior. But there's good news also. Awareness changes everything. When you begin to see the pattern, you can interrupt it. When you name the cycle, you can take back your power. When you say, this isn't about money, it's about pain, you open the door to healing. Whether you're someone who gambles in secret, someone who feels the shame but doesn't know how to stop, or someone who just realized that what you thought was just a habit has become something more, you are not alone. So it's time for some trivia. Today's trivia question is, what is one of the first subtle signs that casual gambling may be turning into a deeper issue? So the choices for answers: A, winning too often; B, hiding gambling behavior or financial losses; C, playing for longer than 1 hour; or D, switching from sports betting to casino games. So I do have an answer, and I will provide that to you later. We've been talking about the descent, how addiction begins with subtle shifts. But let's look at the moment when those shifts become impactful, when the harm can no longer be ignored, when the pain we've been avoiding finally demands to be seen. Let me start with this truth. No one hits bottom in the same way. For some people, it's a dramatic event: getting caught, losing a job, a relationship ending. But for most, it's a quiet unraveling, one thread at a time. It's not just guilt. It's waking up with a pit in your stomach and not knowing why. It's avoiding your own reflection. It's the lie that says, I'll never change, whispered inside your mind on repeat. Emotionally, the consequences can show up as chronic anxiety, sleepless nights, numbness, emotional detachment, and most often, shame. Shame is heavy. It's the quiet weight that tells you you're the problem instead of you're in pain. And when you're carrying that emotional weight, everything starts to shift. So what happens with relationships? Well, let's look at that. Maybe you're not returning calls. Maybe you're lying to cover your tracks. Maybe you're present physically, but gone emotionally. Loved ones start to notice. The trust fades. The connection is frayed. And here's the thing. Most people struggling with addiction think they're hiding it, but the people closest to you, they feel the distance before you even say a word. Your partner doesn't feel safe. Your kids notice your mood swings. Your friends stop asking you out because you always say no, or you're too distracted when you do show up. And suddenly, you're isolated, which ironically is exactly where addiction thrives. So, what happens at work? For someone like James from the previous episode, the guy who was the financial planner, the stakes are high. But this could be anyone. A nurse gambling during breaks, a student skipping class to chase losses, an executive hiding financial discrepancies, or someone spending hours at work in a gambling app with productivity spiraling. The risk here isn't just about losing a job. It's about losing credibility, confidence, purpose. Professional damage accumulates quietly. Missed deadlines, lost focus, burned out motivation, or needing to lie just to keep up appearances. All of this starts to add up. And by the time someone says, "You've changed," you're already knee deep in damage. From what I've seen and what so many people experience, it isn't one big crash. It's like a slow drip of consequences. A few $100s gone, a lie told, a missed dinner, another night refreshing a betting app at 2 a.m. It happens gradually until it feels sudden. That's the quiet unraveling. And sometimes it's harder to respond to it because it doesn't feel like a crisis, but it is. It's the crisis of losing yourself piece by piece. Now, here's where we turn the corner because I want to offer hope. The truth is, consequences don't always wake us up, not on their own. But how we experience those consequences internally, that is what really motivates real change. People don't usually change because they're told to. They change when they feel exhausted from hiding. They realize the pain outweighs the payoff. Or they look in the mirror and whisper, "This isn't me anymore." And at that moment, when your internal world says, "I'm not okay," that's sacred. That is where the healing can begin. Because when the pain becomes too loud to ignore, the willingness to do something different becomes possible. It's time for the answer to today's trivia question. And the correct answer is B, hiding gambling behavior or financial losses. I'm sure most of you were able to figure that one out. I'd like to do some more exploring into what it looks like when gambling harm hits home, emotionally, relationally, and professionally. It's not always a drastic crash. Sometimes it's a slow erosion. And often the first things to crumble are the things we carry inside, the emotional weight. For many people, the first signs of serious impact are invisible to others. It's the anxiety that doesn't go away, even when you're not gambling. The shame that creeps in after each session. The gnawing stress of secrets and lies. You begin to feel like you're living two lives, one that others see and one that's unraveling quietly beneath the surface. And here's the thing. Emotional impact doesn't need a rock bottom moment. Sometimes it's the quiet realization that you can't relax anymore, that joy feels muted, that you're constantly on edge. These feelings accumulate over time, and they start to shape how you show up in relationships. Relationally, the cracks appear in communication. You might find yourself withdrawing, canceling plans, avoiding eye contact, making excuses for mood swings. Or maybe arguments start to escalate over money because there's less of it and more mystery about where it's going. Trust becomes a casualty. And trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Partners feel shut out. Friends might stop checking in on you. Family might express concern or frustration, but the guilt you feel makes it hard to let them in. And that isolation, that's exactly the condition where harm can deepen. Professionally, the impact might show up in missed deadlines, increased absences, or a drop in focus. For students, it might mean slipping grades, missed assignments, or dropping out altogether. The mind is split between responsibilities and urges. And over time, People notice. But maybe the most overlooked part of the hitting impact isn't what happens around you, it's what happens within you. This is a turning point we don't talk about enough. Sometimes the catalyst for change isn't losing a job or being confronted by a loved one. It's the quiet moment when you realize, this isn't who I want to be. Maybe it's standing in front of the mirror and seeing exhaustion in your eyes, or noticing how far you've drifted from your own values. Maybe it's just the ache of loneliness, even in a room full of people. That internal impact, that aching awareness that something is wrong and can't be ignored anymore, is often what motivates real change. Because when you start to see yourself clearly, you begin to reclaim your power. And from that place, healing can start. Now that we've unpacked how addiction takes hold and how the impact becomes undeniable, Corinne is going to walk us through the next stage, what it really looks like to choose recovery and stay in it.
Thanks, Gwen. Let's touch on what it actually looks like to start recovery. There are different types of people seeking recovery and different types of things that bring people to recovery. Are you the person who is seeking recovery because of the impact on those around you, and now you've been pushed to seek help or else? Is there an ultimatum on the table by your loved one, family member, or superior? This person realizes those in their environment are no longer open to enabling their behavior. And maybe the consequences are just too large to ignore. And then you have the gambler who sees the impact on their own. They may not have people who know what's happening, but they know. And that awareness might bring some kind of self-accountability to the table. Maybe them knowing has shown them that, hey, I have a problem. I don't know what's going on and I don't know how to stop it, but I know I need to seek some type of support. There could be thousands of variations of these two types of people who come to recovery. Either way, for someone with a gambling addiction, starting recovery often begins with acknowledging the problem. Whether those around you are acknowledging it and sharing their feedback with you, or you're acknowledging it on your own. That is step one for anyone to make it to recovery, being aware that there is a problem. And experiencing some kind of breaking point usually comes with this, whether it's a breaking point with those around you, or an internal breaking point, or an external breaking point that is something related to finances or your relationships and the status of how things are changing. Oftentimes, a gambler can be in denial of their problem for quite a while before accepting that they have a gambling addiction. And I know to some people who are not gamblers, it's really hard to fathom that, but I want to explain to you why it's hard for some gamblers to accept that they have an addiction, especially for those who are much older. Imagine that you went through 30 years of your life, no signs of addiction. You assume that you're okay because nothing big has happened or exploded in your life. You think things are fine. There's been no red flags or signs of you having any type of addictive behavior. You're 33 years old. You've been to the casino before with friends, but this time when you go, you play this game that you feel like, whoa, I've never even heard of such a game. This game is so fun. It's so cool. It's so addictive. And that could overtly be the same as going on a specific app. Maybe you've played games on apps before, but not this particular game that draws you in. And after getting drawn into this game, here you are, 33 years old, never had an addiction before. All of a sudden, you're spending way more money on this game because all you can think about is trying to win. You just want to win or win back what you had, and you just kind of keep going, and it spirals. You know something is wrong, but you don't know what. What is it? I don't have an addiction. Why would I have an addiction? I've never been addicted to anything. I can stop this. That's usually some of the thinking that comes up for a gambler who is in an older age, a gambler who is up in age And I say 30 or above because if you've been on this earth for 20, 30, 40, 50 years and you feel like you know yourself and all of a sudden you have an encounter with a game that challenges whether or not you really do know yourself, it can be very hard to accept that you have an addiction. That could be the space that denial just continues to own because having an addiction could seem so far-fetched for this person. Maybe I've acknowledged that there's a problem, but maybe I have not accepted that I have an addiction. And that's why we're here, because we want you to be able to gain the knowledge and the understanding, the tools, everything possible to be able to determine where you are and truly accept if you do have an addiction so that then you can address it. So here we are, almost out of nowhere. You have the overwhelming thoughts and urges to keep gambling until you win. And now you have this breaking point. Money is becoming an issue, whereas it never has been before. Or maybe it was, and now it's even worse. Your mental health has been compromised because you can't understand what's going on. And not being able to understand what is going on puts you in a position where you don't know how to treat yourself. You see the impact, but you're struggling with what is happening. But if you're on the fence, if you don't know which way is up, if you're trying to decide, do I have a gambling addiction or don't I? If you're in denial, if people are telling you they see red flags, the simplest way to be honest and real with yourself is to go online, go onto the internet, type in DSM-5, that's D as in David, S as in Sam, M as in Mary, and the number 5, pathological gambling diagnostic. There are 9 questions that will simplify where you truly stand. The honest answer to each of these questions in the DSM-5 cannot lie to you. Ask, answer, and accept. At the bottom of that list of those 9 questions, there's a grid that's going to tell you exactly where you stand based on how you answered those questions. So acknowledging, hey, there's a problem here. Get honest with yourself and do that DSM-5, ask and answer, and come out with the real truth. You either are or are not a problem gambler or have a gambling addiction. But you cannot just say, I do or I don't without evidence to back it up. Here is your evidence to back it up. When you can get to that space, to that point in your recovery, whether it's at the beginning, middle, end, I don't know where you are, but when you can get to the point where you're being honest with yourself, that's the space where true recovery can thrive. Denial cannot thrive where honesty lives. So let's get honest and let's make some changes happen. After accepting what is, the next step is usually seeking support that comes in the form of coaching or therapy, group support, GA meetings. Early recovery typically involves facing denial and shame, tied to loss and secretive behaviors. But I want to hone in on that denial and shame a little bit more because this is something a bit off topic, but it's very necessary for you to understand. If you are someone who has gone down that checklist of the DSM-5, you know that you are a pathological or have a gambling addiction, right? I'm a pathological gambler. I am a problem gambler. I have a gambling addiction. To be able to define where you stand, right? So once you get to that point and you decide to seek recovery, I want to give you a little bit of help with the mindset that you have to have going into recovery. And I'm going to warn you about the mindset not to have going into recovery. The mindset I do not want you to carry into recovery with you is that now that I've decided to recover, this is going to be a straight road. Nothing bad is going to happen and I will recover. That is not what gambling recovery looks like. Gambling recovery is a collection of knowledge, wisdom, understanding, practice, edits, and changing. There is something called a relapse prevention plan. We talked about this just a couple of episodes ago, but what I want you to understand about your recovery journey and that relapse prevention plan is that the relationship between the two is necessary to get you to true recovery. If your relationship mentally with that relapse prevention plan is dialed in on I will not relapse. I will not make a mistake. You're setting yourself up for failure. And I say that because our mental health is something that has to be managed during the process of any type of recovery. And if you're not being honest with yourself going in, it's not going to be a journey that you can mentally grapple. So be honest with yourself going in and tell yourself this, which is a fact. Relapse is a part of my recovery journey. And I'm going to tell you why that is true. Because when you're trying to recover from something, there will always be triggers. A trigger is the thing that ignites the desire for you to do what you want to stop doing when you're trying to recover. And so to walk into recovery and assume that you won't be triggered, that's the first error. Know that recovery means I'm going to have to face my triggers. And in the beginning of your recovery, you haven't built the strength to combat the triggers. You are building the strength to combat the triggers. So with that being said, I need you to understand that setting up your relapse prevention plan when you get into recovery is the right thing to do. Set your mind on, I know that I will be challenged. I know that I will overcome those challenges as a part of my growth and learning on what to put in place to prevent me from acting on my triggers. Some of the best relapse prevention plans are developed from people who have relapsed so that they know what works and what doesn't work and they can tighten it up. And I point that out because a lot of gamblers who relapse, I haven't met one yet that doesn't go through this stage of shame. I have never met a gambler who relapsed and did not fall into shame. And the shame is something that is a dangerous friend at the time because it isolates you away from the same support you were seeking. It communicates things to you that are not necessarily true. And it makes you potentially want to begin to keep secrets about what's really going on. And those are character flaws that we don't want to happen. So we want you to understand, hey, you're in recovery. There will be a trigger and there might be a relapse around the corner. Now, if you do have a relapse prevention plan and you find yourself in a situation where you're triggered, I'm not telling you to say, oh, I'm going to relapse. I'll just fix it later. No, what I'm telling you is do the work to prevent yourself from having that relapse. If you are successful, you need to journal about what worked for you. Journal about what made it hard for you to the point that you almost did give in, because that information is like gold. That's what's going to help you and your support system and your accountability system to strengthen the relapse prevention plan and help prevent you from falling back into it, whether you relapse or not. When you do have a relapse, the key is to get back on the horse immediately. Get back out there, continue to ride down the sunset towards recovery. The danger in relapse is when people do fall into that shame and guilt bubble, and that isolates them and that changes the course of their recovery altogether. And we don't want that for you. Ambivalence is something that is very normal, and fear, right? There is a lot of ambiguity around what happens forward because you just don't know. We don't want that I got this mentality to take place of the work. Always do the work. The work is paying attention to what does trigger you so that you begin to be familiar with knowing your triggers. The work is paying attention to the barriers that you need to put in place to prevent you from falling victim to the trigger. The work is going to support meetings, sharing with your accountability partner. Don't abandon the work. There is courage in honesty, and that is something that is necessary on this journey. Honesty, being honest with yourself first. That is what real ownership looks like. It's very hard to own where you are if you're not willing to be honest with yourself first. Because when we lie to ourselves, lying to others is something we're not even thinking we're doing because we're just lying to everyone at that point. I'm lying to myself and I'm going to spread the news to those around me. But if I'm honest with myself, that's where you're putting yourself in a position to be held accountable at that point. And that can be scary for some people who are dealing with addictive behaviors. And I want to encourage you to really understand relapse without shame, right? And when I say that, understanding that relapse is a part of my recovery journey, I'm not looking forward to relapse, but I'm looking forward to strengthening the boundaries and barriers that I need in place to prevent me from falling victim to that shame, the guilt, potential denial that comes with what just happened, because all of this is just so outlandish for you. Again, you were fine up until that point where you were exposed to something that took over. So now there is work that has to be done. And this work doesn't just have to be done until you hit a goal. This is a part of your lifestyle now. So accepting that not only is relapse a part of my recovery, I might only relapse once. I might relapse 4 times. I might relapse 10 times, but the goal is to make a lifestyle out of recovery. And I know some of you might be asking, well, why do I have to make a lifestyle out of this? Well, when it comes to things like addiction, these are things that just choose to be with you for 2-3 years and then leave you. These are things that are there and they're rooted. And because they're rooted, that means you're the gardener who has to dig up the weeds every day. So let's not look at your recovery as something that's temporary. Let's not look at your recovery journey as something that's not necessary. Let's look at it as something that you get to shape and create to make it look the way you need and want it to further your future. Because recovery is not just about stopping gambling. It's rediscovering who you are. How many of you out there right now questioning who you are or wondering, do I even know who I am? Because I do hear this all the time. Not every time, but I hear it quite often. That because this thing has showed up as a part of my behavior, has taken over my life, has changed my relationships, has compromised my finances, like that's not me. Who am I? Do I even know who I am? Have I been suppressing my emotions for the past 5-10 years about certain things that I've gotten so far away from my own identity that gambling has become the only escape I knew? And now that it's not there, I'm lost again, right? There's so many different ways that this does impact, but rediscovering yourself is an essential part of this. Who am I now? Now that I've gone through this journey, who am I now? And you are the decider. Who am I now? That comes with a few things I want to unpack for you. Because there usually is detriment that comes with the results of gambling behavior. Is there emotional safety in your environment? Do you feel like you have someone who cares about you that you can speak to about what's going on? And I'm going to say this because sometimes some people have that and constant disappointments can hinder that, right? When you just can't stop. So if you're someone who has not sought out recovery and you're struggling to have emotional safety in your environment, in your relationships, because people don't trust you, they don't believe your word, that's time to seek outside support to rebuild those things. What kind of boundaries do you need to put in place for yourself? What kind of lifestyle changes do you need to make when it comes to access to money? What kind of structure do you have or lack in your life? Because the lack of structure is a landfill of bombs for someone with a gambling addiction. I say that because the lack of structure can be a breeding ground for boredom or for free time that you just don't have anything to do. Where do your thoughts go if you have an addiction? So we want to give you the knowing that you need some type of structure. If you are an entrepreneur, maybe you need to structure your days where there are blocks of specific things that must be done. And some of those things are your goals. Some of them are the things that you have to do daily. But what does your structure look like? Give yourself some type of a rhythm that you're recreating and building a forward lifestyle of recovery that consists of emotional safety, that consists of healthy boundaries, and that consists of all the things that you need to push yourself forward. What is your recovery plan? What people are a part of that plan for you? Who is in your future when it comes to you redesigning your life and rediscovering who you are? What interests outside of gambling do you have? Do you even know? What are you willing to explore to replace this habit with? Building new routines, developing new relationships, redeveloping and deepening your self-trust. These are essential keys to a healthy recovery lifestyle. So ask yourself what one thing is today that you can do to build a new routine that's solid. And think about this in terms of habit stacking. There's a book we often reference called Atomic Habits. In there, there's talk about stacking habits. So if you are a morning person who has a morning routine, but maybe you don't have any other daily routine, in that morning routine, that's where we want to build in specific things that are anchoring you in your recovery. Are these the phone calls you need to have with your accountability partner to check in on how the day is going to go for you? Is this the time you want to use to get, 2 paragraphs of journaling done before you start your day? The options are limitless, and it's really up to you to shape and design how this looks. But we don't want the recovery journey to look unappealing to you. That journey is so special. That journey is so life-changing. We want you to vie for it. We want you to prioritize your recovery like it's something you really do want and not something that you're fighting to not touch just in case it hurts, because it's going to hurt on either side. If you're recovering, it's going to hurt because you're having to fight those triggers and go through relapses and figure out what plans can work for you. And if you're struggling in your gambling addiction, it's going to hurt, probably even worse, because in there, it's going to impact your money. It's going to impact your relationships. It's going to impact your livelihood. So we want the impact to always lean in the direction of where you want to go. Now, I know I talk a lot about us not wanting you to feel shame, and you're probably like, but how? How do I do? The opposite of shame in this context is ownership. If I own what I did, and oftentimes people say, own your shit, right? S-H-I-T. Own your it. If I own what I did, what is there for me to be ashamed about? Yes, I dragged mud into that house and got, the walls and the carpet dirty. Yeah, I did that. I own it. I know what I did was a bad thing. I know that the people who it impacts don't like it, but I did do it and I own it. Oddly, that puts me in a position of power against what I'm afraid of. That puts me in a position of power over my fear. And it only gets there if I practice, right? So when it comes to not feeling shame, I don't want to leave you with, hey, don't feel ashamed. I want to leave you with the tools. Practice owning what the shame is trying to smear out. Because if I can face my fear and own it, I'm building resilience in real time. Now I can say, yes, I did that. I did that. And I know I'm not going to lose my life. I know I live another day to thrive. I'm going to turn this ship slow. I did that. It happened. But to not be able to own it pushes you further into shame. You want to hide from it, avoid it, suppress the emotions behind it. Does that sound like a healthy path to you of emotional health, resilience, and mental health? No. Only you have the power to own your it, whatever it is. Progress is not linear because sometimes we have to go through the shambles of things to figure out what does and doesn't work. Have you ever walked through a haunted house? I have, right? And I don't play with haunted houses today. I'm like, you know what? Because I don't like to be touched in things like that. Please don't touch me, because it does. I know it's not real, but it still is like, I don't feel safe in there. However, walking through the haunted house the first time is going to be jarring and surprising, heart palpitations. It's going to have all the things you're probably afraid are going to happen in there. But if you walk through it a second time, you know what to expect. That's how relapse is, right? I walk through it. I don't know what to expect. There's going to be all kind of stuff that happens in here, including the potential of a relapse, including the potential of disappointments. But after having that relapse, revisiting with my coach, therapist, GA meeting group, accountability partner, or whoever I've set up for myself, recounting that with them, strengthening and reinforcing that plan, you're not going to walk through it the same the next time. So don't be afraid of recovery. Don't be afraid of relapse. Now, relapse is a scary thing, and it can really negatively impact a lot of lives. But if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. It's what happens after that proves who you are. Am I going to walk into this again with my head up and say, yeah, I walked through that. Yeah, I hit that clown over there in the corner that was scaring me. I did that. You know it was wrong, but you did it and you owned it, versus hiding, suppressing, and letting this own you. So you take the ownership so that it doesn't have the power to own you. So I hope that I haven't scared you in today's episode. I hope that I really opened up some insightful thinking for you. And this wouldn't be boo-wah, breaking up with addiction, without us giving you homework. This week's homework: locate yourself in the recovery process. Identify which stage you're in right now and be honest with yourself. Once you've identified where you are, journal. What do you need to move forward in this stage? And then share it with someone safe, a support group, therapist, coach, trusted accountability partner, whomever. But that's your assignment. Identify what stage you are right now in your recovery, an honest truth. That means go into that DSM-5, answer those 9 questions, and come out with the truth. Journal about what you need at this stage right now, and share it with someone safe that you trust. Addiction doesn't define you, and breaking up with addiction doesn't have to be a solo mission. Kindbridge Behavioral Health offers safe, non-judgmental support anytime from anywhere. Visit kindbridge.com/appointments and start getting the help you deserve today.